colleagues, it is time for the Rainbow Budget. Woo! Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is the time. This is now. And I am so excited to bring you this year's edition of the Rainbow Budget because I actually have a 2S LGBTQI plus action plan to talk about it. But actually, I'm going to start on a little bit of a darker note. And I will say that I have weighed whether or not to share this. And I guess I just really want to make the point about why this is so important in this province now. And it's so important because, first of all, actually, we're basically, as far as anybody can gather from a lot of research, the queerest province. And so that's really important to recognize. But, of course, there's still lots of areas where 2S LGBTQIA plus folks are lagging behind. So in homelessness, of young people 13 to 24 who are counted as homeless, about 24% identify as 2S LGBTQIA+. So that tells us a couple of things. That tells us that there's still things happening in communities and in schools and in families that disrupt that relationship and increase the risk of homelessness. So we can do a lot about that. We also know that there is a greater proportion of former youth in care who are homeless. I think it's like 27 to 30% on average. And they overlap actually between those. So maybe you didn't immediately become counted as homeless, but you went to child welfare, and from there you have trouble making your way. The community members have disproportionately lower incomes. So a larger share of 2S LGBTQ plus folks aged 24 to 64 make less than $30,000 a year compared to non-community folks. And I think the vulnerabilities also show up in different ways that the world has experienced. So an example would be this past year, the Scotian, which was a building in my riding, was without power for 2 weeks. And the advice was constantly go to residential tenancies, and people did, and we'll go for there. But I will tell you that there's a number of queer and trans folks who lived in that building who were like, I'm not complaining because I know that it's harder for me to get an apartment. And that is the lived reality of folks. They know that a trans person showing up to try and get the apartment in a competitive market is at a disadvantage. I think also of our seniors. So, I have two public senior manors in my riding, as the Minister of Housing knows, and I try and visit quite often. And I have witnessed amongst and between residents, homophobic and transphobic remarks. And making life much less safe and much more difficult for some residents of that. And so, I think across the board. And then this is the other part of what I was sort of debating whether or not to share about why it's so important that we have this action plan. So as you know, you can probably set your clocks by it, but November 20th, May 17th, often March 31st, I host flag raisings here at the House to recognize different days. And I will tell you, each and every time I do that, especially if it's uncontrolled on social media, like if Halifax Noise shares it, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of negative comments. And by negative comments, I'll give you this is literally just a couple of screenshots. I will warn you that this is not parliamentary language. I have sought permission from the Speaker to say these words, and these were directed at me on my social media. Again, this was just the top 5 of a lot. So pedophiles get the rope, mentally ill, child abuser, degenerate, don't touch the children, Lisa, you groomer. And that's for having a public event here at Province House. So a really privileged public event, right? I am able, because of where I sit these days, able to invite community members and allies to Province House to mark Trans Day of Remembrance. And yet, despite all of that privilege, this is the type of abuse that happens, and it happens all the time. I don't like to share it for a couple of reasons. One is I know I occupy a certain amount of privilege. The other is I actually really, really don't want other folks who don't occupy as much privilege to see this. I don't want young trans kids to see that when I'm also inviting them to come celebrate or mark Trans Day of Remembrance or celebrate May 17th or what have you. I want to protect them because I know that they see this all the time. I know they see this on social media. But I wanted to share it just to really, I guess I just really wanted to say that this action plan has been needed. The community has fought for it. It is so relevant and it's so important that we have it. And we also have it because this is a time of regression in terms of rights. So, I've told the story too many times, but, like the right to marry, the right to adopt children, these were all things that I did not have when I was almost 30. So and I'm not that old. Just to point that out. Really glad about the menopause center, but and we thought that as you sort of advance through the courts, as you proved that two women getting married wasn't going to end your world, that we proved that we could parent, that these rights would be entrenched, that we would not roll back. But we see threats of that. We see that happening in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and until recently we saw it happening in New Brunswick right next door. And so young people are, everybody I would actually say, but young queer and trans people in particular are well aware that their rights, that their identities, that their right to exist, that their right to be in community is constantly being questioned and under attack. And so it is so important that Nova Scotia has this action plan. I think I'll just tell a bit of the story about the action plan and then talk about what's in it. Checking my time. Okay, well, you'll probably have to read the action plan yourself. But so when I was elected, I was very concerned that there was really nothing happening in this legislature and thus sort of in the leadership of the province around queer and trans issues. And it had really gone silent under the Liberals. So, we talked about wanting a minister. We still don't have a minister, still looking for one. You can volunteer for that. WPATH, Standards of Care version 8, we still don't quite have that. And I would love someday for somebody to explain to me why we're still holding out on 4 different procedures under that Standards of Care. And an action plan. And so here we have the action plan. And it comes out of recommendations from the Equity and Anti-Racism Strategy. And it was announced, I believe, in the budget of 2023 that this would be brought forward. There were consultations undertaken. I will say that there were concerns in the community about how the consultations were done, about whom was being engaged, about sort of the accountability of those consultations. But nonetheless, there were, I think, 446 people who were consulted. And then, to be honest, then there was a little bit of silence, and I was worried. I was very worried that we weren't going to see this action plan. We were supposed to have a what we heard document. We didn't see that. We did a FOI pop. Nothing was happening. And then suddenly, ta-da, the action plan arrived. And so I think for community members right now, there's a couple of things. One is that not a lot of people know about it at this point because there wasn't, a lot of fanfare from government, to be quite blunt. And as well, government stuff can be kind of boring, so people don't necessarily follow along. But so I think the first thing I would say about this action plan for everybody in here is to read it. I think the second thing is to have it displayed in your offices, to make sure constituents know about it when people come to talk to you about pride in their community, when people come to talk to you about concerns about accessing healthcare, have this ready and just say, well, actually, we have this commitment here for you. Make sure people know about it. I host a sort of bi-monthly queer forum. As people know, I had about 60 people show up to really just analyze and go through the action plan to collect some feedback. We've got the department coming in, or the office, I guess, coming in March to also have an open community meeting. And I think this work is really important. So in the action plan, there's a section on health talking about the work of Pride Health, which has really just gotten started. It's expansion. and hopefully will increase access to gender-affirming care across the province. There's a section on education that talks about curriculum and school and community infrastructure, which is really important. We know this from other communities and other stories and other struggles, but if you don't know that there were ever queer people who were scientists or in history or politicians or all these things, we don't learn these stories, we don't read their books, we don't see their plays, it's hard to know about that community, and it's hard to counter the negative stereotypes. So curriculum is super important. There's a section on community and economic growth, and I think that's really important. It is amazing in this province that we have prides from in every small town at this point, I think, really from tip to tip. And those have proliferated also at a time when, in fact, there has been a push to take away rights, a negative push on the community. And prides are important because they're often people's first contact or first connection with the queer and trans community, whether you're queer or trans or an ally, especially when it's in your home community. And it's an opportunity for people's home communities to be safer, to be recognized as being a safe place. I think there was also quite a bit of recognition in the action plan around 2S LGBTQI plus entrepreneurs, which is great, and working with existing structures that support queer and trans entrepreneurs. There is, some things that then we would probably worry about. So here's what's missing from the action plan, and then I'll comment on a couple of things that are missing. So first of all, there was definitely a miss in terms of working with the other things that are happening in government. So there's actually no reference to gender-based violence in this action plan. Gender diverse folks and trans folks experience the highest rates of gender-based violence. We had folks who came from the autism community who were like, hey, we've been working on autism action plan for a long time. It's not referenced in here. So there's no consideration of folks with disabilities. There's no consideration of newcomer special needs. There's no, there's a lack of intersectionality, to put it quickly, because I'm running out of time. And I think what's important about that is that it's also a lack of being able to connect the dots, right? This is where people say government works in silos, so I'm hoping that work will happen now. There's no funding attached to it. There's no timelines. There's no key results indicators. And so basically, there are some very important statements in here and some very important commitments, but they're not measurable. So it's going to be hard for community to know. It's going to be hard for the office to know. It's going to be hard for folks to know, did we do it? One piece of that, for instance, is what we'll do. We'll continue to support community-based organizations, and that's it. And that is super important, except that there's no way to measure that. And particularly when we're here talking about cuts, we were in the back room there and community groups are calling us saying, we just got our cut. This whole program's gone from this community. So I guess people greet government's work often with a degree of skepticism, right? Lots of blah, blah, blah. What do you really do? How does it affect my life? And this action plan has the potential to positively affect people's lives. And I think one of the main takeaways I would say is that, to not let it be a piece of paper that just sits around, or 12 pieces of paper that sits around, and to not feed into that feeling of skepticism that government does things for communities, because I think this can be really important. I wanted to end on a more positive note than I began. So when I was looking back for the social media bits about what people had said to me in November, I also was reminded that we wrote some messages to trans youth, and I invited everyone to fill a little heart-shaped post-it, put it on a trans flag, and there were some really beautiful things. So I'm just going to read a couple of them to end off. So, we are still here. Everyone deserves safety. You are loved. Trans kids are magical. To the trans youth, we can't wait to see what you do. Thank you.